Hi everybody, Jim Hamilton with Core Resonance. Wanted to check in with everybody. This is the latest video that goes with the latest newsletter. The latest newsletter is titled Intention versus Focus. And in fact, the title for this, or the idea behind this particular newsletter, came from the last newsletter, which was the last article, which was called Intentional Allowing. And somewhere in there, I suggested I do something on intention versus focus. So here we are. It looks like I've actually have a little bit of a series going on, because I have all life seeks God. After that was allowing begets order. Somehow making shit up got in there. Intentional allowing, and now intention versus focus. So I am making shit up. What's interesting about focus, or let's say better said, what's interesting about intention is that it's much broader. Now, what I mean by that is when we work with focus, the mind is limited in its capacity to address what it wants to through focus. In other words, focus is actually a very limited concept. The analogy I like to use is, if you're inside of a sphere, 360-degree sphere, inside of a ball, and you set a dot on the surface, the inner surface of this sphere, that would be focus. Now let's say that you extended that dot by having a bunch more, and let's say you made a circle of 360 dots, so you'd have a circle inside this sphere, and all of those would be different points of focus, and you can only do one at a time. Well, look at the rest of this sphere. It's empty. So let's say you add another circle of 360 dots, and you keep doing that until you've filled up the entire sphere with dots. Those are all individual points of focus, because we can only focus on one thing at a time. And what that means is there's a whole hell of a bunch of stuff that we can't allow for, we can't put our attention to, and actually that's the shortcoming of focus. I might also add that focus takes effort. Focus is I'm not going to say discipline is bad, because obviously it's not. Discipline is actually very important. But when we use effort, that's kind of it has its place and always has, but effort constantly running is a real shortcoming of a way to do things. And so the problem with focus is that effort is behind it. It's a very limited perspective on what you're trying to achieve. It leaves out a lot of possibilities. And this is why intention is so interesting, because it's a much broader bandwidth. So when you have intention, you could have a scale of ideas or an output of thoughts about what you want to achieve that's much broader than focus, and thereby have cover a whole bunch of the points on the inside of this sphere. So what the main point becomes is, when we have intention, we've left a lot of room for innate intelligence to partner with us in what we're trying to produce. And in intention, we can produce something much larger than we can with focus. Now, in the old days, for example, when I was really young, in my 20s, I actually started out with a book called The Lazy Man's Way to Riches by Joe Carbo. I remember ordering it. I remember buying it. I almost might have still lived at home when I got that book. I was pretty young. But I learned how to focus. I learned how to harness the subconscious mind. Meditating showed up shortly thereafter. I had a 40-foot sailboat by the time I was 26. I owned 2 houses. When my wife and I split up at the time, by the time we were 30, we had plenty to split. Both of us had barely gotten out of high school. She was a flight attendant with Delta. But we achieved everything we wanted. And actually I retired at that point. In fact, I kind of dropped out of the world, having quote unquote achieved success that a linear mind's going to produce. What's it going to produce? Boats, cars, houses, what else? And so I moved into a spiritual world, and moving into the spiritual world, intention was a much better fit. and I broadened my scope, and I actually had much more capacity to allow. Think about it. When focus is generated by effort, the ability to allow, it seems to be kind of a contrast. They don't seem to go together that well. When you work with intention and things don't go quite right, or better said, when you work with intention, allowing is a much bigger factor. So you see allowing and intention work much better. And what we're really wanting to learn how to do is we're wanting to learn how to partner with innate intelligence in our reality creating. And when you move past the cars and boats and houses and this and that, the bigger game requires that we lighten up and we loosen up a little bit on what we want, how it should show up, and if it's acceptable or not. To give you a good example, in the old days when we were doing goal setting, it would be, I want a brand new red convertible, blah, blah, this or that, or something better. That's how we allowed for in other words, we knew that rigidity had a certain kind of limit, or if we didn't know how to speak it right, we learned how to, or something better. And intention is even broader than that. And this is where the world is going, because we need to learn how to let innate intelligence contribute to the end result of what we achieve. Why is that? Because from the mind, from the perspective of effort and focus, we can't see the overall of what we're trying to achieve, because in fact, everything meshes with everything else. And maybe we have a certain amount of collapse going on this planet because we've done this linear, efforted version of reality creating that doesn't regard the larger picture. Think about our oceans heating up. Okay, you say they're not good for you. We have problems with the oceans warming up. We have problems with the amount of pollution in the air. The amount of pollution in the air affects the amount of sunlight, and on and on and on. We've had a disregard for that for the last 400 or 500 years, and we're starting to see the results of it, is my guess. We want to learn how to mesh with a larger order, because this larger order shares and extends beyond our capacity. And we need to learn how to let go. We need to learn how to plug into what's true. And you can't do it through that linear mind. Now, let me throw out another thought about the linear mind. Very often in our reality creating based on focus, the mind, as you've probably heard me say many times, behind the mind is resistance. One of the fundamental tenets of core resonance is that in our natural state, we're in presence, and in presence, guidance becomes available, and guidance delivers us to the bigger order that everything else shares. When we're on our own, out of that natural state of connection, we're in overload. Our brains are in overload trying to manually process the world, and so what we spit out has overload associated with it. We're not playing with a bigger picture. In fact, my world says, core resonance says, that the mind was created by the brain on overload as a guard dog for brain on overload. So when we create our realities based on focus, based on what comes out of the mind, there's an inherent limitation built in, and certainly we don't see the larger picture. And I see that as a big problem. In fact, we're in a massive adjustment and a correction right now. You know, stock market goes through corrections every 3 or 4 or 5 years, or whatever it is, hiccups. We've got a global correction coming here because we've been out of sync with nature for so very long. So what I want to wrap this up with today is the idea that what's bigger than new cars, new boats, new houses, new whatever, is an understanding of our partnership with innate intelligence. We are not on our own by any means, stretch, or imagination. We are simply not on our own. Everything else in nature is plugged into a single governance. Everything else in nature actually gets along. Everything comes and goes, and animals eat animals, and this and that. But the overall order that nature shares is quite dynamic and quite clear. And the humans being out of sync with that is our problem. And yes, our evolution is to learn how to become in sync with this natural state of connection that everything else on this planet shares. And when you move away from focus, because it's too damn linear, and we move into intention where we leave the open-endedness of how our realities turn out, we leave it up to something bigger than ourselves to contribute. See, we have the impetus of what it is we want. And as we work our way more inside of ourselves and become clearer about what's true, what we want is actually more in sync with the larger whole anyway, you see. And as we learn how to invite innate intelligence to partner with us, we get it. For one of the things I like to say, we get the ride of our lives. I've certainly experienced it several years at a time, you might say. And so intention is the gateway to the larger scale of order, because we need to learn how to host innate intelligence to express with us, to express through us. And ultimately, unconditional love is about no resistance to our maker, such that innate intelligence expresses through us on a very grand scale, for which, like I've said, we get the ride of our lives. I want you to make comments. I'd like to hear from people. The human mind, the human brain, our nervous system, our connection with the cosmos, it is like the biggest thing there is. Cars, stocks, bonds, all that stuff, banking, mortgages, it's all a little bit secondary to the larger scale of order. I invite you to dig into my article. Let me know what you think. Have a great day. Thank you. Namaste.